Well, good morning, everyone. I will let everyone join in. We have a lot of participants today, so let's wait for everyone to connect, to come in. But welcome to our webinar on water reuse regulation and its impact on the water sector. We are very happy that everyone is here. I will just give a second for everyone to come. We're already at 60 participants and counting. Coming in. Welcome, everyone. I'm Caroline from EVA. It's nice to meet you all virtually, even if I can't see you, but I know you're all here. I will just give it one more minute because participants are still logging in. And then we will start. All right, well, I think we can start. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our webinar on water reuse regulation and its impact on the water sector. My name is Caroline Herten. I am the communication officer of the EVA, and I'm very happy to welcome you all today. We have a lot of participants who registered coming from all over Europe, but also from all over the world. So we'll see who can make it with the different time zone. Thank you to all our speakers for being here today, for joining us. I will start by giving a small, quick presentation about who is the European Water Association, because I think a lot of you don't know who we are. So we are an independent NGO dealing with the management and the improvement of the water environment. We have members from nearly all European countries now with different types of membership. We have national members, corporate members, and research members. So there is really something for everyone. And our goal is to provide a forum for the discussion of key technical and policy issues in Europe. And we do that through conferences, workshops, webinars like today, but also meeting. We have special working groups of experts, and we have a lot of publications, and we try to spread everything through different media channels. But don't hesitate to go on our website, check what we do, and don't hesitate to contact us if you have any question or requests. So today, don't hesitate please to ask a question. You can use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. If you want to ask a question yourself, you can also raise your hand, and then I will give you the right to speak. We'll just ask all the questions at the end of the webinar, so don't hesitate to give the name of the speaker who you want to ask the question if it's specific, so we know who to ask the question to. Of course, we will share the presentation like always after the webinar, and the webinar is also recorded. So don't worry if you miss something, you can always rewatch it afterwards on our YouTube channel and consult everything. Before we start, here's a quick overview of the program. So we have Professor Wanner, who will start today, and he is also the moderator of the event. And then we have discussions with Professor Habekamp, Professor Dreves, and Paolo Innocencio, who will talk about the impact on the water actors, but we will come to that soon. So now I'm very happy to introduce our moderator for today, but also the first presenter, so Professor Jiří Vána. He's a full professor of water technology at the University of Chemistry and Technology in Prague, in Czech Republic. And there he is the head of wastewater treatment and reuse group of the Department of Water Technology and Environmental Engineering. He's also the speaker of the wastewater treatment and reuse group of the Czech Water Association, and a very long-term member of the European Technical and Scientific Committee of the EVA. It's not his first conference, workshop, or webinar with us, and we are very happy to have him here today again. And his research activities have focused on technologies that allow the reuse of treated wastewater as a substitute for river or drinking water. I cannot tell everything that is done because we will be here for hours, but it's a quick overview. So Jiří, I'm happy to give you the floor and start today. I will be here in the background. So if there is anything, let me know. Okay. I'll let you share your screen and we can start. Have a good webinar, everyone.
So, good morning to everybody. Caroline, thank you for the introduction. And it's a really privilege for me to start and then to moderate the workshop, which is devoted to the regulation for water use, which is just now today starting to be applied in some EU member states. My presentation is divided into two parts. In the first part, I will give you some general introduction about the water use in Europe, the conditions and barriers, etc. And then we will be speaking in the second part in more detail about the legal regulations in the EU. So the water use can be ruled by two basic principles. That means we are preparing the reclaimed water with certain quality, which is tailored according to the purpose. And in all cases, the water use project must be safe for human health and for the environment. This is a very important conditions. Otherwise, the idea of the water use could be very quickly spoiled. To fulfill these basic rules, the reclaimed water must meet some quality requirements. And to have some standardized quality requirements, we need to have some joint standards. In the EU countries, we can see three different types. We have some countries which they have already their own national standards for reclaimed water quality. Those countries are especially from the Mediterranean area. Then since today, we will be using the EU regulation number 741 from 2020. And then we have a very important set of ISO technical standards about the reclaimed water quality. Why we are talking in Europe for water use? There are some principal drivers for the use of reclaimed water, and the most important of them are water shortage and frequent periods of droughts, which we are experiencing now in Europe. And this leads, of course, to the ever-increasing price of water, both of the natural water as a resource, but also of drinking water, which is also combined with the increasing quality of the tap water. And this means that the tap water should be mainly used for the human consumption and not for other purposes where it can be replaced by reclaimed water. And then we have also some political or let's say social drivers, like the general introduction of the circularity in economy, also in water sector. And if you are talking to common people, they are already understanding that the use of drinking water for other purposes than for human consumption is a kind of waste of resources and money. Last year, most of the European continent experienced a very severe period of drought in the middle of the summer with different intensities. You can see here on the map, but many countries were in some way affected by the shortage of precipitations. And in some countries, it was even visible, like here you can see the situation from northern Italy. Of course, on the other hand, there are some barriers for water use. And concerning the European Union, the main barriers are connected with low experience with water use in most EU countries, because not all EU countries were using or are already using the reclaimed water, and they are now learning this new water resource, how to use it. And with this is connected the lack of experience also in identifying and optimizing the appropriate treatment technology, and unfortunately also with this economy of the process. So we still have to learn how to develop very efficient business models for water reuse schemes. All these barriers are, of course, connected with three major factors, and that's the safety of reused water, which must be always guaranteed. Then the economy, which must be more beneficial and suitable than the use of tap water. And finally, not all people in the European Union are still accepting the use of reclaimed water instead of drinking water. What are the theoretical possibilities of reclaimed water use in Europe? So the EU countries, they produce every year about 40 billion cubic meters of treated wastewater. But from this amount, only about 1 billion is reused, which means that on average in the EU, only 2.5% of treated water is used, which is different from especially the Mediterranean countries, where the percentage ranges between 12% in Italy up to 90% in Cyprus. And the estimates of the European Commission now are that we can reach at least 40% with applying this regulation on the European average. Water reuse must meet certain conditions, and these conditions are defined in the legislation. I will mention in this part of the presentation how the regulation, which is today starting to be applied, was created, and we will mention also some auxiliary documents which were published by the EU, and finally we will discuss some possible reasons for the fact that some of the EU countries, they didn't accept the regulation into the national water legislation. So what was the way of the European Union to water reuse legislation? I think it started in 2012 with this material. The main purpose of this material was to consider all the ways how to guarantee water resources in Europe. And the Commission for the first time published the idea that water reuse can be accepted as a solution which lower environmental impact than the other alternative water resources. And the Commission promised to prepare some EU-wide legal instrument which will be controlling this area. Another impulse for preparing this regulation was the material published or accepted by the EU in 2015. That was the action plan for the circular economy, and then there was a series of technical guidelines dealing especially with the quality requirements. And based on those documents, the European Commission finally prepared in May 2018 the first proposal for water use regulation. This proposal was negotiated in a standard way in the European Union, but I would like to stress here also the role of the European Committee of the Regions, because this committee came with the requirement to broaden the scope of the regulation from only agriculture to also some other areas of water reuse. And finally, the regulation was accepted by the Parliament and the Council in May 2020. What are the basic goals and expectations of this regulation? So the main purpose was to encourage circular approaches in water use in all EU countries, and in this way to address the water scarcity and droughts and safeguard enough water for public and environmental needs, with the estimated expenses which can be acceptable. And the expectation was that by application of this regulation, the EU would be able to reduce the water scarcity extent in Europe by about 5 to 10%, when the amount of reclaimed water will increase from 1 billion to about 6 billion per year. The regulation consists also from two important annexes. Annex number 1 is defining the use of reclaimed water, and here you can see that also apart from the agriculture use, it was the scope of the regulation was enlarged by the application in industry and in municipal water management, for example, for cleaning the streets, irrigation, urban greenery, or for some other environmental purposes. The quality of the reclaimed water according to this regulation is tailored according to the use, and the quality is divided into 4 classes. And the other tables, they define the quality parameters, both chemical and biological, for the individual quality classes, the minimum frequencies for monitoring, and the table 4 is bringing also the so-called validation monitoring, which is always used when the reuse project is starting. Very important is annex number 2, which is dealing with the risk management, because all use of reclaimed water, because it's treated wastewater, can be somehow connected with the risks. And this annex gives some basic structure how to prepare the risk management plans, but also how to apply some preventative measures when the reclaimed water is used in the irrigation for agricultural purposes, and guarantee the good quality of the products and the safety of the agricultural products. In 2022, the European Commission published guidelines which were already promised in the regulation, the guidelines how to apply the regulation and how to help the application of the regulation. These guidelines are dealing with the relationship between the producer and the user and the state administration institutions. And the second part is devoted to technical aspects, especially the technical aspects of the preparation of the key management or the risk management plan, which are the main key elements. And also how to convert all these decisions or all these plans and management control to the final decision about the use of reclaimed water. And still in 2022, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission published another type of guidelines. These guidelines were mainly aimed at the technical aspects of the safety management or risk management plans. They are based on also other regulations, not only the EU regulation 741, but also this report is reflecting the requirements of other standards. And this report brings several examples how to assess the health risks and environment risks in the water reuse projects. And what is very important, this report brings 14 case studies or 14 successful case studies with the examples how the management plans were formed and applied. Principally, the report is recommending to proceed into the so-called modular approach, and the modules are 4 of them. The first module consists of the description of the entire water reuse scheme or project. Module number 2 covers the identification of health and environmental hazards. Module 3 is dealing with identifying the monitoring programs, which will be controlling the risks and the quality of the applied reclaimed water. And finally, module number 4 lists protocols which are necessary for some emergency management, but also for the communication among the actors, that means between the producer, user, and the administrative bodies. Now, the European Commission for this year, and it will probably happen in the 3rd quarter of this year, prepared some technical specifications, which will be giving the specifications for the key elements of the risk management. And this material will be again helpful in preparing the robust and safe risk management plans for the reuse of wastewater. In this time, it will be specified only for the agricultural use. And finally, concerning the standards, we should mention that there are also standards of technical committee of ISO. The technical committee prepared several norms, technical norms, which are dealing with the quality of reclaimed water for the reuse in agriculture, irrigation, in urban areas, again for the risk and performance evaluation. And now the last one is dealing with the water reuse in the industry. We should also mention that the institution of water reuse has got the support of also from the new proposal of the prepared or revised Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive of the European Commission, because in article number 15 in paragraph 1, this proposal says that the member states shall systematically promote reuse of treated wastewater from all urban wastewater treatment plants. So this is a very important support from this new urban wastewater treatment directive. We are now on 26th of June when the regulation 741 can be applied, and the individual member states, they have 3 options. They could either accept the regulation, or they could refuse the use of the regulation, or they could decide about the application only in some areas of the country. We still do not know the final outcome of this procedure, but from the map which was presented earlier this month at the meeting of EU water directors, we can see that the European Union, in relationship to this regulation, has divided into about 2 halves. The western part of Europe mostly accepted or adopted the regulation into the national water law system, and the eastern part mostly refused to apply the regulation. And there is also one country, and Germany, which, according as I was explained by Professor Drews, they decided to apply their own national regulations, which will be based on the principles of the EU regulation, but will be reflecting the specific German conditions. So finally, the question is whether the application procedure of the regulation was success or failure. First of all, we have to say that the regulation in this way doesn't meet the main proclaimed purpose, that means to provide union-wide legal framework, because about 1/2 of the EU member states didn't accept the regulation into the national law. According to me, the reasons for that is the rather low experience with water reuse techniques in some countries. Then the regulation itself, especially as far as the risk management is concerned, is rather complicated, and the states probably were afraid that there was not time enough to prepare for that. And the third factor could be that the regulation was oriented too much to the agriculture irrigation, which is not the priority in some countries. In some countries, for example, in our Czech Republic, the amount of water used for agriculture irrigation is negligible. But there are needs of the use in some other areas like industry, environment, urban solutions, and that was not enough stressed in the regulation. So what next? We will see during the next years how the regulation will be accepted in practice. Maybe the European Commission will decide to prepare another regulation for those purposes like industry, environment, etc. And in the meantime, we have definitely be improving the acceptation, the public acceptation of the reclaimed water by some projects, by some water reuse projects which are going on everywhere in Europe, and which the main purpose of these projects, like this Horizon project, is to demonstrate the safe use of reclaimed water in public areas. So with this slide, I would like to thank you for your attention. I will stop sharing my screen, and we can proceed to the next presentation, which will be given by Professor Haberkamp. So let me to introduce Jens a little bit. He got the degrees from the Technical University of Berlin, where he has been working also as a consultant for some company for several years. And now, since 2013, he's been appointed as a professor at the Münster University of Applied Sciences. And he is very much involved in the water reuse because he is the spokesman of the water reuse group of the institution, which is called German Water, and also in the German Water Association, DWA. So now, Jens, please, the floor is open for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Jiří, and also thanks a lot for inviting me to this webinar. Can you see my presentation? Is it okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect, thank you. So in the next couple of minutes, I would like to give you a very brief overview on how to, approach the implementation of water reuse projects. As Professor Wanner already said, water reuse will not solve all our water problems, but water reuse or treated water may be a substitute for precious fresh water, so that the competition freshwater resources may be reduced by water reuse. The driving force, as Professor Wanner already said, the main driving force is water scarcity. And for instance, in Germany, until just a couple of years ago, there was quite a high abundance of water. So there was no lack of water, and therefore, with very few exceptions, water reuse didn't play any role. But as you see on this picture from last year, climate change has already or also arrived now in Germany and Central Europe. And that's why water reuse is currently being more and more of an issue. Well, in terms of the driving force, so the lack of water, and you may also add the price of water, which is often connected to the lack of water. There are some general rules. So first of all, the higher the lack of water, well, the higher is also the willingness of potential users to carry additional costs. So for instance, of the farmers to carry costs for additional treatment and distribution of treated water. This, of course, has also to consider the alternative. So if the alternative is crop loss and therefore a high economic deficit, well, this has, of course, also to be taken into account when drawing such a balance. Then the openness of politics and also public authorities increases with increasing lack of water. That's also an issue that we are just observing in Germany. And finally, public acceptance plays a very important role in terms of water reuse. And we already have seen in a lot of regions all over the world that, well, the public acceptance strongly increases with increasing lack of water. So in terms of the supply of the treated water, the distance between the wastewater treatment plant or water treatment plant on the one hand and the areas of use on the other hand are of crucial importance in terms of the costs. So on the one hand, of course, capital costs have to be borne for the implementation of distribution networks and also maybe of storage tanks, but storage tanks are not necessarily connected to the distance. And on the other hand, the operational costs for pumping the treated water also increase with increasing distance from the treatment plant. The catchment of a wastewater treatment plant has to be taken into account, or very carefully taken into account in terms of water reuse, because some dischargers, such as certain industries or larger hospitals, for instance, may discharge wastewater containing increased concentrations of, for instance, organic micropollutants or heavy metals. And these water constituents may, well, require additional treatment in order to reduce the risk regarding the application of treated water. And this higher treatment or additional treatment, of course, also increases the costs. And it may even or it may even, well, make impossible such a reuse project. And as Professor Wanner just mentioned, last year, the European Commission well, published a draft version of the future European Wastewater Treatment Directive. And since in this new directive, removal of trace organic contaminants or micropollutants will presumably also be included, there may be some synergies with water reuse. So if on an individual site or on a local scale, water scarcity is a fact, and there is a certain demand or high demand of potential users. So the first steps of implementation are, or the very first step of the implementation is the analysis of the entire water reuse scheme, the entire system. So as I said, you have to start with the catchment of the wastewater treatment plant, and you have to have a very close look on the existing wastewater treatment process. And this together, so the quality of the raw wastewater and the existing wastewater treatment process is decisive in terms of the quality of the current quality of the secondary effluent. And of course, of the required additional water treatment. And the degree to which the secondary effluent has to be further treated depends on the potential reuse purposes. As Professor Wanner already said, there are 4 quality classes which which are connected to the purpose of reuse. All parties involved have to be identified and included into the entire process. So the main parties involved can be seen here. So it's not only the operator of the municipal wastewater treatment plant, but of course also the operator of the water reclamation facility. This may be the same unity, the same person, but it can also be different facilities. Then the reclaimed water has to be distributed and maybe also stored before. So the operators of these infrastructures have to be included in the scheme. And of course, finally, the end user of the reclaimed water. And all this is the competent authority. So the authority that is responsible for giving the permit has also to be included in the process from a very early point. Then, as Professor Wanner already said, the preparation of a risk management plan is obligatory regarding the EU regulation. And this risk management plan has to be prepared on the responsibility of the operator of the water reclamation facility, under the involvement of all stakeholders involved. The application, there is at least one permit that has to be applied for. So that's the application or the permit for the production of reclaimed water. And this permit has to be applied for by the operator of the water reclamation facility. There may be other additional permits, for instance, for storage, distribution, and the use of the reclaimed water. For instance, in Germany, it's quite probable that there will be a further, permit required for that has to be applied for by the end user of the reclaimed water. So let me just briefly conclude. I guess we all agree now that climate change is very likely to increase droughts, also as we see now in Central Europe. And the requirements for water reuse are not trivial at all, but with good cause. So it's water reuse is connected with certain risks, and it is very important to address these risks and also minimize them. And these requirements are accomplishable if the driving force is strong enough and if the will of all parties involved to implement such a reuse system is high enough. The preparation of a risk management plan is quite a new challenge in the water sector, but it's not only a specific issue regarding water reuse, but it is now also required in drinking water supply, and it will be required in the future in wastewater treatment and discharge. And as I said, there will be some synergies with the future European wastewater treatment directive. And therefore, I'm quite sure that water reuse will contribute to the conservation of precious freshwater resources, which can then be used for other purposes, so that reusing treated effluent or treated water for brewing beer may be just a funny exception in the future. So with this, I thank you for your attention, and I give back to Jiří.
Okay. Thank you, Jens, for a very clear and precise presentation about the new tasks which will be connected with the application of the regulation. And I would like just to repeat that, please, if you have the questions to the presenters, please write them down into the section Q&A, where we can read them during the discussion session. And now it's my great pleasure to present another speaker of our seminar, Professor Jörg Drews. He is the chair professor of the Urban Wastewater System Engineering at the Technical University in Munich. But before becoming the chair in Munich, he started his academic career at the School of Mines in Colorado in the United States. He is a very famous scholar, publishing a lot of scientific papers. Just to mention, his Irish index is almost 60. And Professor Drews is also very active apart from the academic world. He is a member of the Advisory Council on Global Change of the German federal government, but is also very active in the German Water Association, DWA. And many of you know Professor Drews as the former chair of the water reuse specialist group in IWA, in International Water Association. And last but not least, because we are on the webinar of European Water Association, I should mention that last year Professor Drews was awarded with the Dunbar Gold Medal, which is the top award of the European Water Association for water scientists. So now, Jörg, the floor is open for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very kind introduction, Jiří. Good morning. It's my pleasure to have a brief opportunity to also hit on some elements Professor Wanne already mentioned in his talk, overcoming barriers to further implementing water reuse in Europe. So I picked essentially three areas I'd like to briefly touch upon, which might represent the skepticism of water reuse or implementing water reuse across Europe, maybe with the exception of Southern Europe, where there is a lot of experience already and practice on the ground. So a frequent question that comes up all over again is, do we really need it? It's also mentioned it's too complicated, and is it safe? So on those three topics, I'd like to elaborate a little bit. So do we really need it? I think it's more a question of awareness and adaptation or willingness to adopt. I just want to briefly mention, as the previous speakers already, when you just reflect on the last 5 years, 4 of them, when we think of 2018, 19, 2020, and 2022, already had major impacts with respect to extended droughts in Southern Europe, but also in Central Europe. So things are changing dramatically, and the world as we know it is changing, and this certainly has significant implications. Even if we meet the Paris Agreement on a global scale with 1.5 degrees temperature change, or not to exceed this 1.5 goal, people who are born today or are young professionals will live in a very different world in the future, not to speak of if we don't meet this target. So the extreme events we're experiencing already will come with significant challenges to the water sector. And this primarily are resulting in declining supplies, a very different precipitation pattern, and extreme events, too much and too little over extended time periods. And with that comes a growing uncertainty for planning and also operation, which is calling for new approaches, more flexible approaches to cope with these challenges. And of course, also an increasing demand in sectors that have not really utilized, for instance, water for irrigation an awful lot. And that certainly is true for Central Europe, when we just think of the agricultural sector, but also for urban green, as it was mentioned before, or the vegetation in general will need more water to survive. So with that, there's certainly a need to diversify supply options, recognizing the increasing demand in agriculture, urban landscape irrigation, certainly also to secure public water supply, but also maintaining ecological base flows. And we can ask the question, do we always need to deliver drinking water quality for these purposes? Or can we also go to a more tailored approach that would meet a water quality that is appropriate for the intended use? And that brings us to water reuse. So indeed, I do see a tremendous opportunity to at least provide the option for water reuse, even in countries that have not experienced water reuse in the past. So the map Professor Wanner showed is interesting, because even those countries who opted out at the moment will fall into this category and will have to cope with these challenges I just mentioned. And of course, it's not intended that we need to do water reuse nationwide. It's always a local issue, a local shortage in many countries where water reuse indeed could play a role. All right, coming to the next question. It's too complicated. Well, it's mainly a question of implementing risk management and providing proper guidance to do so. So as mentioned before, and when you look in the regulations, there are two lines essentially that are formulated. One are the set of requirements that need to be met at the treatment plant with respect to certain water quality requirements. But the second leg is the risk management framework. And this is a very important element. So we're not just talking about some additional advanced treatment we might have to impose at our conventional wastewater treatment plant. It's the entire system we need to manage. So it's a systemic approach. And you see this in this orange dotted line, that we're looking at the entire system, which is comprised of the conventional wastewater treatment plant, the advanced treatment plant we need to implement, for instance, to do filtration, disinfection. We need to think about transport and storage, the conveyance part, and the type of application. And all actors involved in this system need to be on the table. And need to be considered. So that's the basis how we want to do the risk management plan. And indeed, there is a lot of guidance, even new guidance forthcoming from the Commission, the technical specification guidance, how to impose and execute the risk management. But mainly it has three core elements: the definition of public health goals, the implementation of the risk management plan, and the compliance element. And this is a continuum. So you're not really done after going through this once. You have to review it on a regular basis. Maybe you have new information, you have a change in your practice of reuse, and that needs to be adopted in the risk management plan. So it's sort of a circle where you go back and reflect on your practice, on new requirements, and then see whether you need to adopt. And indeed, this risk management framework is widely used in sensitive areas. When we think of aerospace industry, when we think of the food industry, and indeed, we do have it now implemented also, as mentioned before, in the new drinking water directive. So when you look at Articles 7 to 10, they essentially require very formalized, transparent risk management. So regulators, operators need to adopt to these new requirements anyway. So it's a new sort of culture, how we operate water systems. And the same is true here for the water reuse regulations, which apply as of today, but also are embedded in Article 18 in the revised or proposed revision of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. So a new set of goals. It's in my opinion, it's a transparent process. It's very appropriate for this type of practice to properly manage risk, and we just need to adopt to it. The last question, is it safe? So it's a question of how do we ensure safety for human and environmental health? And when you look at the requirements, the minimum requirements of the EU, as I mentioned, they are specified with respect to certain water quality parameters. There's pretty much adopted by from international established standards that different types of reuse practices. Category A even allows food crop irrigation for crops eaten raw. When you look at the ISO standards, they essentially are looking very similar. When you look at the WHO guidelines, very similar approaches, and the same is true for the log removal validation criteria. So what are the total log removal values that have to be accomplished by a treatment train that is specified for category A in the EU regulation, and that is based on a risk-based approach where you essentially define a tolerable risk in society, which is accepted by a country or by a society. And on this basis, considering the raw water concentration of pathogens, you can derive these log removal values. So very much in line with international established guidance documents and standards, and proven by a lot of experience in countries who are practicing water reuse for a long time. So this can be considered a safe practice. Of course, you need to assure it on a day-to-day basis, 24/7, depending on the type of reuse you're doing it. And for that, additional guidance is needed. Very important, in my opinion, in particular for countries who have very little or no experience with water reuse, is to show and demonstrate that this indeed is a safe practice by establishing demonstration scale projects where you can learn from their experience. You can look at this on the ground, you can talk to operators, you can talk to appliers or users of this water, and this is going a long way. So they can function as a multiplier in really implementation, but it's also very important to maybe even adjust. And as we have just learned in the overview, countries do have the option to impose more stringent requirements, and that might be justified depending on the setting. So looking at this is very important. We also are conducting a demonstration scale water reuse project in northern Bavaria. We're looking at agriculture irrigation for crops eaten raw, as well as urban landscape irrigation. This is sort of the setup we have there. I can give you more details later or after the seminar. We're looking at a multi-barrier treatment train, but we're also comparing this more advanced train to the standard train of the EU regulation, which consists of secondary effluent, followed by filtration and just disinfection. And we're applying these different water types in a greenhouse on crops eaten raw, but also in an open area with drip irrigation, as well as urban landscape irrigation. And of course, depending on the site-specific conditions, we might also have to go beyond these more hygienic requirements when we think of water quality parameters with respect to trace organic chemicals or antibiotic resistance. So you need to keep that in mind, but you need to make an assessment depending on the relevant endpoint. So is there really a risk for groundwater? Is there a risk for human health? Depending on the practice. And that's not always the case. In particular, when you do irrigation following the good agronomic rate approach, or a demand-orientated irrigation, then there's it's very unlikely that reclaimed water would actually hit the groundwater, for instance, or people are exposed. So that needs to be considered on a site-specific cases or basis. That's all I have. So I'm happy to discuss this further with you, and just wanted to give you some additional input here. Thank you. Back to Jerry.
Okay, thank you, Eric, for a very interesting presentation. And I'm especially happy with the final recommendation to demonstrate the water use projects in practice. Just one question or a remark for our presenters, Jörg and Jens. There is already a list of very interesting questions in the Q&A section. So please have a look in this section. And if you can already answer in written, you can already do it now so that we have more time for the questions at the end of the presentation. And now we will come to the final presentation, which will be given by Paolo Innocencio. Paolo studied environmental engineering at the Technical University of Lisbon. And then he worked at very different positions as a sanitary engineer or wastewater treatment plant manager, including the probably most modern wastewater treatment plant in Portugal, the Alcantara plant. And now he is working as a manager of strategic studies in the company which is operating the plants in Lisbon, the company called Aguas de Tejo Atlántico. So, Paolo, please, the floor is open for your presentation.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation for this webinar. I'm from Águas do Tejo Atlântico, and I'll make a presentation about Águas do Tejo Atlântico plan towards water reuse and circular economy pathway. First of all, I'll make a quick introduction to Águas do Tejo Atlântico. Águas do Tejo Atlântico is the multi-municipal wastewater drainage.
Paolo, I'm sorry, we're just not seeing your presentation yet. You haven't shared your screen, just for info.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a green button.
Oh, yes. Share
screen.
Yeah, sorry.
It's all good.
And now the presentation mode.
Do you see now?
Yeah, we can see it.
You can switch also to the presentation mode to have the presentation for the whole screen.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
Perfect.
Okay. So I will talk about Águas do Tejo Atlântico plan towards water reuse and circular economy pathway, like I told you previously. So Tejo Atlântico is the multi-municipal wastewater drainage treatment company of Lisbon. In this area we include 23 municipalities, and when we cover an area of 4,000 square kilometers and 2.4 million inhabitants of served population. We have a well-defined mission: treat and value the collected sewage. We have 100 wastewater treatment plants and almost 1,000 kilometers of sewers. Our strategy is clear. We focus on the future to turn the present. For that purpose, it's crucial to make a proper baseline assessment of our current reality. What happens now? What are our problems and bottlenecks that we have to face, and therefore to make possible and achieve our goals? Upgrade the wastewater treatment plants to water factory. We want also to go from a water rejection to valorization, from waste to bioproducts. And last but not least, we want to go from linear to circular economy. In this manner, we sometimes want to simplify, considering that in our interpretation, wastewater is a raw material and main substance that is used to produce other things. What are these other things that we produce and want to increase production in the future? I'm talking about reused water with our reused water brand Água Mais. We are talking also about biosludge, biosludge as fertilizer to agricultural application. Like I told you, our brand Biosludge Plus, and bioenergy that aims energy production through digestion and co-digestion, biogas production, and electric valorization. Besides this cogeneration production, we also produce electricity using solar panels. You know, are increasing this production as time goes by. But with new realities, when we're facing these new with climate changes and other issues related with that, these new realities demands more than profitability and return analysis, not only financial analysis. We also must think about sustainability and preservation. It's essential. Remember that water is a scarce resource and is present in everything. Without water, there is not life. In fact, water can have several qualities. It doesn't always need to have maximum quality, like potable tap water, for various industrial, agricultural, urban uses, such as watering green spaces, washing cars, washing roads, and I'm talking about urban usage. It's more and more a necessity. I think that the key thing here is the necessity of having water. Focusing on reuse projects, I would like to emphasize some ongoing and starting ones as presented on this slide. I would mention the pilot project that we started in 2018 to watering the enclosed Festival of Rock in Rio. We started 5 years ago. And also a project that is ongoing now, is starting right now, is about watering West Cliffs golf courses near Obidge. And we also, near Obidge, are starting briefly other golf courses irrigation projects. We are already making sustainable irrigation with Água Mais in the green north zone of Parque das Nações in Lisbon, which allowed to save last year, between July and October, more than 100,000 cubic meters of potable water. We are now irrigating World Youth Day venue that is going to happen on the first week of August, near Berol's plant, as can be seen in the pictures on the left. The strategic plan of water reuse in Lisboa, also called Peral Mais, has many phases, and the first one was already carried out. The reuse network from the wastewater treatment plant from Alcântara, where I worked, to Cais do Sodré has already been implemented. So it is possible to wash the streets of this downtown area of Lisbon. Part of this reuse network is inside a main sewer tunnel, Caneiro de Alcântara, as depicted in this slide on the right. Alcântara's plant, the biggest one of Lisbon, with an average treated flow of 140,000 cubic meters per day, is fully confined by a green roof, with a total area of 3 acres, irrigated with treated and reused water from this plant. This green roof is essential for thermal insulation of building, rain retention, and landscape integration. The Peral Mais plan will allow the irrigation of most green areas of Lisbon city, more than 470 acres, and almost 4 million cubic meters per day. It implies the creation of an Água Mais, reuse water network, with origin in Lisbon 3 plants, Alcântara, Berolles, and Chelas, in the oriental part of the city. The plan provides for the construction of 51 kilometers of conduits, 18 reservoirs, and 22 lifting stations. In the mentioned wastewater treatment plants, Alcântara, Berolles, and Chelas, the most appropriate and innovative technology for Class A reuse water production are being analyzed according to the features of each of these plants in terms of treated water quality and area available for this implementation. So now we are identifying and optimizing appropriate wastewater treatment technology, like Professor Warner mentioned previously. In picture on the left, in fuchsia, are depicted the network and green areas of Lisbon to be integrated with Água Mais. This plan also includes a green corridor with reused water lines and lake near Alcântara plant, as depicted in this slide. TES Atlântico has a contract for reused water supply with IKEA for the purposes of acclimatization of the store in Lourdes, already in force since June 2011, with an average annual supply of 500,000 cubic meters per year, with positive results for energy and environmental efficiency. We are talking about heating and cooling, depending if we are in winter or summer. To show that today there is technology to transform dirty water into clean water, and I remember the examples of Singapore, Namibia, California, South Spain, like Murcia in Zamor, Israel. We made a craft beer in partnership with the brewer Linz and the company Moinhos. Let me say that it's a very good beer, 100% secure, and I can say that because I drank a lot of it in the past. It was created to change mindsets and show that reuse is available to water, to produce Água Mais with different qualities and different costs to different purposes. And thank you for this presentation. Any doubts, I'm available for them.
Okay, Paulo, thank you very much for your interesting presentation and for the recommendation which kind of beer we should try next time visiting Lisbon.
For sure, we have here available beer for you.
Okay, so now, Caroline, we have already a lot of questions in the Q&A section.
Yes, we have.
So, what is our time available still?
Oh, we still have until 11:30, so we still have some time. I know that Professor Drewitz already answered a few online, so thank you. But no, we have some time, so you can start asking the questions.
So there were some questions which were dealing with the water reuse in other areas than in agriculture. For example, whether it will be useful to have some specific regulation for the water reuse in industry. There is also another set of questions dealing why European Union is so far behind the other countries using reclaimed water already for many years, like some states of the United States, Australia, Singapore, and other parts of the world. And also one or several questions are dealing with the possibility whether the reclaimed water will be used also for production of the tap water in Europe. What is the possibility in this direction? So before I will start trying to answer by myself, I can ask my colleagues if some of them is willing to start the discussion. So
yeah, I might jump in here on the reason why there is so little water use implementation so far. I think we need to qualify this a bit. Because when we think of Southern Europe, Spain, Italy, Malta, Greece, there's a lot of experience and long-term implementation already happening. 50% of all the water reuse is actually occurring in Spain at the moment in Europe. And Spain has implemented a national plan to grow water reuse, has implemented national guidance very much in line with the California water reuse regulations, Title 22. So there's plenty of experience, but for the rest of Europe, Central Europe, Northern Europe, there was simply no need to look into water reuse in the past. And given the accelerated change in the water resource availability, things have to change, and we might need to be also more open-minded to look at into alternatives. But in order to do so, we need to speed up the process. So the first one is to look in the regulations, also demonstrate the practice tailored to the maybe national requirements. And of course, the situation when you think of Germany or Netherlands is different compared to Spain. And that needs to be considered in the national specification or adaptation of these regulations. So certainly a need to speed up the process, but we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of experience in Southern Europe. There's plenty of experience across the globe with similar questions being asked by regulators and the public. Is that safe? How can it be implemented? And how can it be best controlled? So I think we can just simply also look in other countries and see what experiences really materialized and how they try to look into safe practices.
Yeah, maybe I can add that even though that some EU countries, they have a rather low water resources, if you take into account the renewable resources, but they already, because they face this problem for many years, they already learn how to live with it. For example, I can mention the situation in Central Europe, in our country, in Slovakia, in Poland. We significantly reduced the consumption of drinking water. For example, in the Czech Republic, we have now about 90 liters per capita per day, which is much less than in some Western countries. And even though we have very low water resources, we built in the past a lot of reservoirs. So the Czech Republic and Slovakia has a lot of dams on the rivers, and these water reservoirs, they provide quite safe amount of water. But now definitely the situation is changing, because we also experience some summers without rain, and then the dams are not so helpful, as you can understand. Concerning the drinking water production from the reclaimed water, as I was talking to many people in Europe, I think there is no, at the moment, there is no intention and no willingness of common population to drink the reclaimed water. People are starting to agree to use the reclaimed water for cleaning the streets, irrigating the parks, etc., flushing the toilets, but they were rather reluctant to drink it. And the reason is simple: we still are not in such desperate situation like Singapore and other countries which are already using the reclaimed water for drinking water purposes.
I will just jump in because we have Valentina Bastino who wanted to add something.
Oh, wonderful.
So I will promote her to panelist so she can share with us today. She's from the European Commission, and I'm sure she has a lot to say. She's joining us now. Just need a few seconds.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning, Valentina.
Let me see if I can actually start my video. Okay, I'm looking at the wrong camera, so I will just start. I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I did have a little bit of a comment. Let me introduce myself. My name is Valentina Bastino, and I work for the Sustainable Freshwater Management Unit of DG Environment in the European Commission. And I am the officer responsible for the water reuse regulation. So I just wanted to thank you for organizing this event, which I think is very informative, and I've been following the question and answers section, to which I have absolutely nothing to add. It was a great exchange. I just wanted to pick up on the first intervention and the first presentation regarding the fact that the regulation is not going to be immediately fully applied in every single member state, and how this kind of signals that one of the objectives of the regulation, that is stimulating the uptake of water reuse, has not really been successful. And I just would like to nuance a little bit that statement, and echoing also the intervention of, for example, Professor Drews and other speakers, that I personally see this more of a process, not something that overnight, just because there is a regulation, changes. The intention of behind drafting this regulation was indeed to make it easier to increase public acceptance and to intervene in an area where indeed in Europe there has been some hesitation. But it was not intended to oblige anyone to make use of this practice right away everywhere. I echo what has been said, that water scarcity is a driver for this practice. And indeed, we see where in Europe water reuse has been practiced for years, decades in some cases, is indeed the areas that were a bit drier than other areas in Europe. But we do start picking up increasing interest in countries that up to 10 years ago maybe were not facing issues. With this series of very dry summers and periods of prolonged and very severe droughts that we keep facing summer after summer, I do think that the practice will become more important in irrigation, but also in other sectors. And indeed, we keep hearing about very interesting projects in industrial settings or in urban or even environmental settings. So I would just plead for giving time to the rules to really start applying and to come into place. And little by little, I do believe that the practice will become more used also in countries where there is some hesitation at the moment. Voilà, this was all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we can only agree that we are just today starting a new process, which we have to learn how to cope with the regulation and how to apply it in the practice. And as I mentioned, and also Eric Treves showed in his presentation, it will be very important to demonstrate the water technology, the technology which is able to prepare reclaimed water quality, which is safe and still economically feasible, and the use is safe and acceptable for the general public. There were also some questions about the acceptance of the reclaimed water use and how to improve. In one of our previous seminars, we had a very nice example from the United States when the speaker described the famous project of reclaimed water use in the Orange County, down to Los Angeles. And at the beginning, the people refused to pumping the reclaimed water into the aquifer to improve the quantity of the groundwater, because it was not very well explained to the public what's the reason. And after several years of a very tough drought, the people understood what is the importance of this project, and they even in some public poll asked the authorities to restart the project with the pumping the reclaimed water into the aquifer in this region. And this is what we have to do in those countries which still has not accepted the regulation and convinced the authorities that we as a water engineers can provide the technology and also the whole procedure in such a way that will be not harmful for the health and for the environment. If somebody else want to add something to the questions, you can see them in the Q&A block.
Well, if I may, I saw that there is a question for Paolo. Could you give some information about the business models behind the systems you showed? Who pays for all these new infrastructure investments and operation? Maybe you can talk a little bit about this.
Okay, regarding the financial models, we are talking about two different types of schemes. First of all, we have for class B, water quality, and national tariff that we are implementing now. Whereas when we are talking about projects with more quality of the water, we are regarding water with quality of class EA. In this type of projects, we have to make an assessment for that project, individual assessment to see what is the tariff that we need to address to cope with all the investment that we have to make to that particular investment. So we have two types, class B and national tariff for Grupo Águas Portugal, and class A, a more quality and more investment involved. We have to make an individual assessment, individual financial assessment.
Thank you. Because the lack of experience with the business models is one of the barriers I mentioned. We have to learn how to calculate the price of reclaimed water to be acceptable. Thank you. I found in the meantime another interesting question. The question is whether in some reuse projects we are considering the use of reverse osmosis, and then what about to do with the high salt content concentrate. So first of all, for example, from our project, which I showed in the last two transparencies, the wider uptake Horizon project, we irrigated with the effluent from Prague wastewater treatment plant, the urban greenery, the grass, flowers, and bushes in the arrangement when there was no dilution water coming from the precipitations. And after 2 years, we have not observed any problems with the increasing salinity of the soil. So I think for the irrigation purposes, both in agriculture and also in the urban greenery, because there are still some precipitations in Europe, the reverse osmosis will be probably not necessary, but it's very often used for the preparation of the reclaimed water for the industry. And last week, the JRC Center of European Commission organized a very nice workshop on the reclaimed water use in industry, and there are very many examples of the reverse osmosis application, for example, in Spain or in other countries of the European Union. I think the presentations from the last week workshop are available at Roberta Maffetone from JRC. You can ask her. Jörg, do you want to add something to the question of the reverse osmosis in the water reuse projects?
Yeah, I think you already indicated the main focus indeed is more on the industrial side. That also has to do with the water quality requirements. But with respect to disposal, we're simply limited where this can be executed because of proper brine disposal options. So if you do it in an inland setting, it's very expensive to go towards zero liquid discharge. It is being practiced partially in the coastal areas of Spain, also in Malta, for instance, for groundwater recharge, where higher water quality requirements exist, and there are disposal options for brine disposal, but less so in Central Europe, with the exception of smaller plants focusing on industrial reuse. So I think the general approach also is to go towards non-membrane, maybe non-high pressure membrane applications. The issue of salt increase when you go to irrigation is maybe less of an issue in many areas in Europe due to the more seasonal application. So this is really a demand in the growing season, spring and summer, rather than year round. And therefore the salt built up in the soil will be flushed during winter precipitation. So that's why the desalination is maybe not as needed compared to other places in the world.
Yeah, exactly, because some people are using the example of Israel, but this is not the typical example for Europe, because in Israel, most of the water they have available is in fact just the reclaimed water, and there are no precipitations for years, for example. So the salinization of the soil could be a problem. But in Europe, we still have some precipitations, even though they are not so evenly distributed during the year like we need it or we would like to have, but they are still, and they provide the dilution capacity. So, Caroline, can we still continue with the questions?
Yeah, then we can take maybe one more questions or two, and then we'll have to say goodbye. Let me check which one we haven't answered yet, because you already tackled a lot of things.
There was very interesting questions from
I think there is one in the chat.
What about the when you are using the reclaimed water, and that's usually in the summer season when there is a lack of other resources, what about the residual flow in the rivers, and how the when we are taking the effluent from the plant which is not discharged into the river and it's used somewhere else, how this will affect the quality of the river water? And that's a very important question, and I think there is no general answer. It must be always evaluated case by case. For example, we have several types of rivers in our country. Some of them are very well, the flow is very well controlled by the dams. So there is no problem in summer to keep some constant minimum flow. But I can imagine that there is a problem with the river, which is just a natural, and there is no capacity of the reservoir which can be used for maintaining the minimum flow. And then could be the situation when we should calculate what should be more beneficial, to use the reclaimed water or to pump the effluent to the river.
If I may add, this is being considered in the risk management plan of the EU regulation. So essentially, there are two requirements that need to be met before you can even think of a water reuse project. One is the minimal flow, the ecological flow that needs to be maintained at all times. So this might limit water reuse projects at plants that are discharging to streams with very limited discharge. And the second criteria is if you have, I would say, problematic discharges in your sewer system, let's say large pharmaceutical industrial complexes or biotech industry discharging problematic constituents, then it's probably better to stay away from water reuse because the risk management would be very challenging. Or sure that there's on-site treatment, or you have a separate sewer system where the industrial discharge is actually routed away from the domestic wastewater. But I don't see this as an argument against water reuse, but certainly needs to be considered from the get-go.
Mhm.
I think we're going to have to start closing. It's already past 11:30, and I'm sure everyone has other meetings or things to attend. So Jerry will let you have the last words, and then I will just conclude.
Okay, so I would like to thank European Water Association for organizing this webinar, because it was really on the right date. And that's probably why we received such a nice audience. At the moment, we have still 116 participants who are joining us. And I would also like to thank very much to all speakers, because the lectures were very clear, providing to the local experience and showing us how we should cope with the regulation in the future. And I would like to stress that we are now the first day when the regulation is being applied, and we have to learn how to use it efficiently and how to use it for the support of the water use, because there is a really great potential for the increasing the number of reclaimed water used in the European Union. And the last things come definitely to Caroline, because she was very nice in preparing the workshop. She guided us very carefully. Everything was prepared perfectly, and thank you very much, Caroline.
Caroline, we are without sound.
We can't hear you.
Yes, I realized it when I was talking. So I just say thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you, Jerry, for moderating the discussion today, and everyone for the presentation. I will just do quickly, but like I said, I will send all the presentation afterwards. I will put the recording on YouTube in the next few days, so you can rewatch everything. You can check the different webinars we have coming, our conferences. The next one will be in October about race to zero CO2 neutrality. So also very interesting. So you can always come on our social media channels and see everything we do. Then we share all of our events and everything we do in Brussels and all the important topics we tackle on. And you can check our website with all the dates and sign up to the newsletter. So you receive everything directly in your mailbox. And then when you leave the webinar, please take the 2 minutes to give us your feedback, what you want to hear about, what are interesting topics to you, so we know what to plan next for you. So thank you again, everyone. I wish you all a great day, and see you soon.
Okay.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.